You have lied to yourself more times before breakfast than most people lie to a stranger in an entire year. And the terrifying part isn't that you lied, it's that you believed it. You checked your phone 40 times today and called it work. You replayed an old argument in the shower and rewrote your own lines until you sounded wise. You call that reflection. It is not reflection. It is defense. And defense is the reason you are standing in exactly the same place you stood 1 year ago. Self-awareness, real self-awareness, is not a warm feeling from a journaling app. It is not a vision board. It is not checking in with your emotions. The kind of self-awareness that built the top 1% of performers on this earth, the closers, the founders, the champions, the ones who move a room without raising their voice, is a weapon. And you have never once picked it up. Machiavelli wrote it plainly. Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are. Most people read that line and think about deceiving others. The top 1% read it and go quiet, because they know the first person they ever successfully deceived was themselves. By the end of this, you will understand the 5-phase system elite performers use to see themselves with total clarity, and the price they pay for it. And near the end, I am going to show you one habit the highest performers on earth practice in private, alone, that looks, from the outside, almost insane. Stay until then. You are not ready for it yet. Phase 1. The mirror you refuse to look into. Here's what the unaware never see. They think their reactions are facts. You get cut off in traffic and call the other driver an idiot instead of asking why you were already tense before you got in the car. You get passed over for a promotion and call your boss political instead of asking what skill you've avoided building for 3 years. This isn't an accident. It's architecture. You built a mirror that only shows you the version of yourself you can live with, and you've been polishing it for years. The poker champion does not do this. Watch him after a loss. He does not blame the card. He does not blame the dealer. He sits alone, replays every decision, and finds the exact hand where fear made the call instead of logic. He isn't punishing himself for sport. He's running an audit. And an audit only works if the auditor isn't also the one hiding the numbers. You are the one hiding the numbers. This is not about self-esteem. This is not about being kind to yourself. This is not about positive thinking. This is about seeing what is actually there, even when it's ugly, even when it indicts you. Most people flinch here. They close the tab. They decide this video is too negative and go back to the story where the traffic, the boss, and the ex were the problem. Good. Let them leave. You're still here, which means part of you already suspects the story was never true. Consider the actor who just won the award the whole room applauds for. Later that night, alone, he doesn't watch the scene that won him the trophy. He watches the scene he nearly got fired over 3 years earlier. The one where his timing was wrong, his face gave too much away, his voice cracked at the wrong moment. He watches it on a loop, not to punish himself, to catalogue exactly where he lost control of himself, so it never happens again in front of an audience that matters. You don't do this. You delete the recording. You skip the meeting where they gave you feedback. You tell yourself you already know what they were going to say. You don't know. You have never once let yourself find out. Stay with me, because phase 2 is where this stops being uncomfortable and starts being expensive. Phase 2. The cost of staying comfortable. Here's the part they never teach you. Unawareness doesn't feel like ignorance. It feels like confidence. That's what makes it so costly. The man with no idea how he comes across in a room walks in certain he's charming. The founder, who has never once asked her team what it's like to work for her, walks into the board meeting certain she's a visionary. They aren't lying. They believe it completely. That's the trap. You cannot fix what you are certain isn't broken. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ran an empire while writing private notes meant for no one but himself, said you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Translate that off the page. The only asset in this entire game that is fully, permanently, unconditionally yours is your own mind. Not your title, not your following, not the version of you people applaud online. Your mind. And you have left that asset completely unaudited. Robert Greene calls this the fatal flaw, the one weakness so close to you that you've stopped seeing it as a weakness at all. You've renamed it. You call your defensiveness passion. You call your avoidance patience. You call your inability to take feedback confidence. Every flaw you refuse to see, you've simply given a better name. Think about the coworker who worked at the same company for 20 years and received the same feedback in every single review, communicates poorly under pressure, and did nothing about it for 2 decades. Then, at 55, watching someone 12 years younger take the promotion, he wondered why the ceiling above him never moved. It was never the company. It was the same door he refused to open, review after review, until the door closed on its own. But it gets worse. The people around you have already seen the pattern you cannot see in yourself. Your partner has seen it. Your closest friend has seen it. They've decided, quietly, that telling you isn't worth the fight it would start. So they let you keep walking into the same wall, and they simply stop mentioning the wall. The silence you've mistaken for peace is often the sound of people giving up on your growth. If any of this has made you uncomfortable in the last few minutes, good. That discomfort is data, not injury. Comment the words, "I see it now," if a specific memory just surfaced while I was talking. I want to know how many of you just got called out by your own memory. Phase 3, the silent audit. Here is how the top 1% actually build this. Not through vibes, through mechanism. First, they collect brutal external data on purpose. They ask direct reports, exes, old coaches, the harshest critic they know. One question: what is the thing about me you've been too polite to say? Then they do not argue with the answer. They write it down and let it sit for 24 hours before responding at all. Because the first reaction to the truth is always defense, and defense is not data. Second, they review themselves the way a general reviews a lost battle, not the way a fan reviews a highlight reel. The founder who studies her worst pitch meeting in more detail than her best one. The soldier who debriefs the mission that went wrong out loud in front of the unit before anyone touches the mission that went right. Third, they sit in silence. No phone, no distraction, no input. On purpose, for a fixed block of time, specifically to hear what their own mind says when nothing is performing for anyone. Most people cannot survive 10 minutes of this. You cannot survive 10 minutes of this. The silence isn't empty, it's loud. It's full of every question you've been outrunning with noise, and that is exactly why you keep the noise on. Read this twice. The aware never confuse a compliment for the truth. and they never confuse criticism for the truth either. Both are just data points from someone else's limited view. What they trust is the pattern, the thing that shows up from 10 different mouths in 10 different rooms over 10 different years. That pattern is the only verdict that matters, and most people have never sat still long enough to notice it repeating. Machiavelli warned that everyone sees what you appear to be, and only a few ever experience what you really are. Most people read that as license to perform. The top 1% read it as a warning. Perform long enough, and even you will forget which version was ever real. Phase 4. The weaponized pause. Once you can see yourself clearly, something changes that has nothing to do with self-improvement and everything to do with power. You stop reacting on delay. Most people respond to an insult, a rejection, a piece of brutal feedback within seconds, driven entirely by whichever old wound just got touched. The self-aware have a gap between the event and the response, and inside that gap is where every real advantage in this game lives. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about suppressing what you feel. This is not about pretending nothing bothers you. This is about choosing your next move instead of letting your oldest wound choose it for you. Watch the negotiator who gets insulted across the table and doesn't flinch. Not because the insult didn't land, but because he clocked exactly which old fear it was aiming for, named it silently, and refused to hand it the room. That pause looks like calm from the outside. From the inside, it is the most disciplined violence a person can do to their own impulses. Now, watch how the game actually works. You don't separate from the room by being louder or smarter. You separate by being the only person in the conversation who isn't being run by a version of themselves formed 20 years ago, in a completely different room. Comment the phrase, "I choose the pause," if you're done being run by reflexes that were never actually yours. Phase 5. The price of seeing clearly. Here is the part nobody puts in the highlight reel. The executive who got blindsided by his own termination call was always the last person to know why. Not because no one told him, because he had made himself impossible to tell. Every attempt at honest feedback over a decade had been met with a flinch, a justification, a quiet punishment for the messenger, until eventually everyone around him simply stopped trying and let him walk, fully confident, into the meeting that ended his career. Nobody warned him. Nobody owed him a warning. He had spent years training them not to bother. That is the price of staying unaware. It does not arrive as a lecture. It arrives as silence, right before the moment that ends something you cared about. The marriage, the career, the friendship you didn't realize you'd already lost. Most people quit right before this next part. So if you've made it here, you're already ahead of them. Here is the habit I promised you, the one that looks almost insane from the outside. The highest performers alive schedule a private, recurring appointment with their own worst evidence. Not their highlight reel, their failure file. The email they got fired over, the relationship they ended badly, the pitch that emptied the room. They reread it on a fixed schedule, not to relive the pain, but to make sure the lesson never fully scars over into a story that lets them off the hook. Most people spend their whole life running from that file. The 1% schedule time with it, the same way a general keeps the map of his one real defeat on the wall of the room where he plans every future war. This is not nostalgia. This is not guilt. This is not punishment. This is maintenance. The same way a blade needs the stone even after it has already cut clean. Machiavelli wrote that there is no avoiding conflict, only postponing it to someone else's advantage. Avoid the truth about yourself long enough, and you don't get to skip the reckoning. You just hand the timing of it to someone who is no longer on your side. Here is who you become on the other side of this. Calm in rooms that used to unsettle you, not because nothing bothers you anymore, but because you finally know exactly which button is being pressed and by whom. Quiet in moments that used to demand you defend yourself, because you no longer need the room to agree with your version of events. Dangerous, in the oldest sense of the word, to anyone who was counting on you never looking too closely at yourself. The price is real, so I won't pretend otherwise. You will lose the comfort of a few stories you've told about yourself for years. You will lose some of the people who only loved the version of you that never asked hard questions. You will spend some nights alone with the failure file while everyone else watches something easier. That is the tax. Every asset worth owning has one. The version of you that needed the excuses has to die today. Not gradually, not when you're ready. Today, in the space between this sentence and the next one you choose to act on. There is more past this point that most people aren't disciplined enough to use responsibly. What happens when you turn this same audit outward, onto the rooms and the people running plays on you, without ever becoming cruel with it? That's a conversation for those who have already proven they can point this at themselves first. Comment the words, "I open the file," if you are done being the only person in your life who never gets the full truth about you. I want to see who is actually serious and who just liked the sound of this video. Subscribe if you want the next audit, not because the button needs it, because the next version of you does.